This is the Bible Book Club.
And we're in Deuteronomy.
Welcome to the club. Last episode in chapters 19 through 22, continuing the Just Do It sermon, Moses was elaborating on the sixth commandment, you shall not murder. He took it a little further than just physically killing, also talking about people's rights. For example, stealing some of their promised land upon which their lives and the future lives of their children depended, or the right of a certain life for the captive women if they married an Israelite man. The point is, life is precious to God. He created it, and He has a standard for how He wants us to live it.
All right, just do it. Obey the seventh commandment is our next topic. Exodus 20, verse 14 says, you shall not commit adultery. And that's what this is going to be all about. Adultery is a concept that was used for more than just married people. It was a concept that came from the impure mixture of different things, which was to the Israelites outside of God's design for those things. So one word for it was in marriage, adultery. You're mixing two things that shouldn't be mixed. But they had other kinds of mixtures. We talked about one last week, the mixture of wearing opposite clothes, or we're going to get into more here. But understand, God wanted them to be an example to the nations and to keep things super pure. Now, when something is pure, it was considered holy. The biblical concept of holiness has two aspects: separation from sin, so you don't do what's wrong, and the dedication to something special. Instead, you say, I'm going to do this and set this aside to be special. When something is dedicated as special, it is not to be used for everyday purposes. It is set aside as holy, like the furniture and altars made for use in the tabernacle. We talked about those. The following examples were just a few of the ways that made Israel different or set them apart as holy from all the other nations. They had lots of rules about what they do and don't do. This is chapter 22 continued.
Verse 9. Do not plant two kinds of seeds in your vineyard. If you do, not only the crops you plant, but also the fruit of the vineyard will be defiled. Do not plow with an ox and a donkey yoked together. Do not wear clothes of wool and linen woven together.
The first three examples point to distinction in animals and plants. Mixing them violates the purity of the species. Yoking a donkey and an ox violates the mating of two kinds of animals in Leviticus 19. The mixing of wool and linen was set aside as sacred for the priests only, not for the common people. Israel was to follow the pattern of creation. God separated light from darkness, water from sky. Therefore, God's chosen people must be careful to maintain the distinctions between the things that God made distinct. Whether it is how to plant crops or whom to marry, they were to keep separate what God had made separate.
I wonder if God's upset about the golden doodles.
Okay, we're in the New Testament. This is the Old Testament. We don't live under these laws anymore.
The golden doodles are so cute.
I know.
And
it's a whole new world, isn't it? It's okay.
Verse 12, make tassels on the four corners of the cloak you wear.
Numbers 15 elaborated on this command. The purpose of the tassels was to remind them of the Lord's commands. Paul uses this comparison of mixtures to make the point with the Corinthians that they need to be different from the people around them, distinct in their relationships with God and with God only, forsaking idols in 2 Corinthians 6.
2 Corinthians 6, verse 14, do not be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteous and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness? What harmony is there between Christ and Belial? Or what does a believer have in common with an unbeliever? What agreement is there between the temple of God and idols? For we are the temple of the living God. As God has said, I will live with them and walk among them, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. Therefore, come out from them and be separate, says the Lord.
So Paul is still using this idea in our heads of being separate from the world that God had used in so many daily practices with the Israelites to remind them. That's why he said, make those tassels, to remind them to obey these laws so that they would appear different to the other cultures. Okay, here are the marriage violations that make them different. virgin or not?
Back to Deuteronomy chapter 22, starting in verse 13. If a man takes a wife and, after sleeping with her, dislikes her and slanders her and gives her a bad name, saying, I married this woman, but when I approached her, I did not find proof of her virginity, then the young woman's father and mother shall bring to the town elders at the gate proof that she was a virgin. Her father will say to the elders, I gave my daughter in marriage to this man, but he dislikes her. Now he has slandered her and said, I did not find your daughter to be a virgin, but here is the proof of my daughter's virginity. Then her parents shall display the cloth before the elders of the town, and the elders shall take the man and punish him. They shall fine him 100 shekels of silver and give them to the young woman's father, because this man has given an Israelite virgin a bad name. She shall continue to be his wife, but he must not divorce her as long as he lives. If, however, the charge is true and no proof of the young woman's virginity can be found, she shall be brought to the door of her father's house, and there the men of her town shall stone her to death. She has done an outrageous thing in Israel by being promiscuous while still in her father's house. You must purge evil from among you.
First, let me say that getting married back then sounded very stressful and even life-threatening. In this example, the man takes a wife and finds no proof of virginity. The phrase dislikes her is better interpreted as he rejects her because of his suspicion. He then calls her out on it, which slanders her name, of course. Because this also slanders her parents' name, because she was living under their roof and they were responsible for her, the parents, must provide proof to clear themselves of the slander. Now, this is super awkward to me and must have required parents to swoop in on the honeymoon night and grab the sheets right out from under them.
They did do that. They would wait outside.
I just can't picture it.
I mean, I read a lot of novels about like kings and queens in like the 1400s. They still did that.
I just can't even imagine because, but I guess if they didn't do it, a man could become a serial virginity stealer, hiding evidence and rejecting women all the time. Now, if the parents have proof, the husband is fined for slander and he has to live with the wife forever. But my feeling on that is poor her, because I would never trust my husband again if he did that to me. I would be so furious. I'd need some serious counseling. It would carry into years of our marriage. Now, if they do not have proof, the wife is stoned. So scared to death, you'd be waiting for like the verdict. You know, it'd be traumatic especially because these girls were so young when they got married, waiting to be cleared as a virgin the day after a honeymoon. It had to be really scary. You'd have to be a brave woman just to get married. Now, why was this so important that a woman be a virgin? Well, procreation was the method by which the land was inherited. The only way to ensure that a child was indeed yours back then was to marry a virgin and to be faithful in your marriage. And then you'd know all the sons that you had that were going to inherit the land were actually yours. Additionally, in Genesis 2, God created man and woman to be one flesh. And once they became one flesh, it was impure for them to have sex with anybody else. Fidelity, the mixing of two pure things, was supposed to be kept pure. Now, in 1 Corinthians 6, Paul compares fidelity in marriage to fidelity with God. And this is like what I said, God was teaching Israel this concept of pure and impure in being separate from other cultures and in not mixing things.
1 Corinthians 6, verse 12. I have the right to do anything you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but I will not be mastered by anything you say. Food for the stomach and stomach for the food, and God will destroy them both. The body, however, is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. By his power, God raised the Lord from the dead, and he will raise us also. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ himself? Shall I then take the members of Christ and unite them with a prostitute? Never. Do you not know that he who unites himself with a prostitute is one with her in body? For it is said, the two will become one flesh. But whoever is united with the Lord is one with him in spirit. Flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies.
There is just a mystery about the two shall become one, and our bodies that we don't fully understand here. But what we can take away from this is that our bodies belong to God. He alone has the ability to raise us from the dead, and He created us. And therefore, we just need to listen and obey. The bottom line is be faithful to your spouse and be faithful to God, because you don't want to make one or the other relationship impure. So here's another one. Caught in the act of adultery when you're married.
Verse 22, back to Deuteronomy, by the way. In verse 22, if a man is found sleeping with another man's wife, both the man who slept with her and the woman must die. You must purge evil from Israel.
When caught, and you had to literally be caught because there was no other way to prove it back then, this was considered a defilement of the camp and of each other that required death for both parties. The New Testament carries words for us about adultery also. First, it is still a command that we are to adhere to in Matthew 5:27.
You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go to hell.
Second, thankfully for us, there is no stoning anymore. There is forgiveness for all sin, and no one is to cast a stone. John 8:2 says this.
At dawn, Jesus appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say? They were using this question as a trap in order to serve as a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, Let any one of you who is without sin to be the first to throw a stone at her. Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the women still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? No one, sir, she said. Then neither do I condemn you, Jesus declared. Now go and leave your life of sin.
The point is, we have all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Hence, the need for a Savior. Okay, the next one is adultery with the betrothed virgin.
Back to Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 23. If a man happens to meet in a town a virgin pledged to be married and he sleeps with her, you shall take both of them to the gate of that town and stone them to death. The young woman because she was in a town and did not scream for help, and the man because he violated another man's wife. You must purge evil from among you.
Then also rape involving a betrothed virgin.
Verse 25, but if out in the country a man happens to meet a young woman pledged to be married and rapes her, only the man who has done this shall die. Do nothing to the woman. She has committed no sin deserving death. This case is like that of someone who attacks and murders a neighbor. For the man found the young woman out in the country, and though the betrothed woman screamed, there was no one to rescue her.
Betrothal in Israel was not our engagement. It was different. It required sexual fidelity by both men and women. So if the girl was betrothed, it was considered adultery, just like if she was married. And death was the penalty unless she was raped. If she was raped, only the man is stoned to death. Now, Joseph and Mary were betrothed. And so this law applied to Mary.
He could have divorced her.
It justified his divorcing her, but he didn't want her to be stoned. Listen to Matthew 1:18.
This is how the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit. Because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law and yet did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quietly.
Right. He was going to divorce her quietly because that public disgrace could lead to stoning. Sweet Joseph. Of course, the angel does appear to him and heads that off. But the next one is rape involving an unbetrothed woman.
Back to Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 28. If a man happens to meet a virgin who is not pledged to be married and rapes her, and they are discovered, he shall pay her father 50 shekels of silver. He must marry the young woman, for he has violated her. He can never divorce her as long as he lives.
Okay, this one is horrendous to me because the girl has to marry her rapist. So this two becoming one, they become one, and that was just a big spiritual deal. And they can never divorce. The rapist has to pay the bride price to the father, and it's a done deal. They're married. Many suggest that the father can refuse the marriage and still get paid her bridal price as compensation by applying the laws in Exodus 22:16 to this case. In Exodus 22, the woman is seduced, not raped, but she doesn't have to marry the guy, but he still has to pay the bride price because, of course, you can't get that from anyone else because she's lost her virginity. There is no death penalty here, as there is no adultery because neither one was married, or the involvement of anyone married. But gosh, if your dad didn't get you out of it, you had a lifetime sentence with your rapist, and that sounds
awful.
Intolerable to me. Okay, now we have a law on intermarrying.
Verse 30, a man is not to marry his father's wife. He must not dishonor his father's bed.
Okay. Not surprising. A man cannot marry or sleep with his father's wife, even if it is his stepmother and not his biological mother. You may not sleep with anyone your father sleeps with, as it was dishonoring, because these words, dishonor his father's bed, really translate uncover his nakedness. And that just means you can't sleep with whoever your father sleeps with. This is why Reuben, the firstborn of Jacob, lost his firstborn double inheritance because he slept with his father's concubine in Genesis 35. If he had been born in Moses' time, he would have been stoned for doing it. Paul agrees with this law in the New Testament, and in 1 Corinthians 5:1, he reprimands the Corinthians because
it is actually reported that there is sexual immorality among you, and of a kind that even pagans do not tolerate. A man is sleeping with his father's wife, and you are proud. Shouldn't you rather have gone into mourning and have put out of your fellowship the man who has been doing this?
Note that example at the end there of church discipline. Paul asks why they didn't put him out of their fellowship for the sin he committed. Chapter 23, purity in public worship. Now, to enter the assembly of God, you had to be in a pure state. Impurity to the Israelites was different than what we usually think of purity being. Leviticus is season 3. You can specifically listen to episode 6 for a full explanation of pure and impure and clean and unclean. The state of impurity was not a bad thing. Oftentimes, there were lots of natural reasons, like you got your period or something, that someone could not worship in the sanctuary because they were unclean. Here, Moses gives 4 reasons why someone could not attend formal corporate national worship.
Chapter 23. No one who has been emasculated by crushing or cutting may enter the assembly of the Lord. No one born of a forbidden marriage, nor any of their descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even in the 10th generation. No Ammonite or Moabite or any of their descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even in the 10th generation. For they did not come to meet you with bread or water on your way when you came out of Egypt. And they hired Balaam, son of Beor of Pethor, in Aram Naharaim, to pronounce a curse on you. However, the Lord your God would not listen to Balaam, but turned the curse into a blessing for you, because the Lord your God loves you. Do not seek a treaty of friendship with them as long as you live. Do not despise an Edomite, for the Edomites are related to you. Do not despise an Egyptian, because you resided as foreigners in their country. The 3rd generation of children born to them may enter the assembly of the Lord.
Those excluded from worship are a man who's been emasculated or mutilated in their reproductive organs. This may have had something to do with circumcision being the covenant identification for males. anyone in forbidden marriages or descended from one, which could include those in incest, marriage to a cult prostitute, or possibly marriage to a pagan. Anyone descended from an Ammonite or Moabite down to the 10th generation, and if you've listened to other episodes, you know why. Anyone descended from Edomites or Egyptians down to the 3rd generation. Remember, the Edomites descended from Jacob's twin brother Esau, so they are actually relations. All right, rules for uncleanness in the camp, and this is the war camp.
Verse 9, when you are encamped against your enemies, keep away from everything impure. If one of your men is unclean because of a nocturnal emission, he is to go outside the camp and stay there. But as evening approaches, he is to wash himself, and at sunset he may return to the camp. Designate a place outside the camp where you can go to relieve yourself. As part of your equipment, have something to dig with, and when you relieve yourself, dig a hole and cover up your excrement. For the Lord your God moves about in your camp to protect you and to deliver your enemies to you. Your camp must be holy, so that he will not see among you anything indecent and turn away from you.
The wars the Israelites were engaged in were holy wars, and therefore the ritual purity of the military camp was important. Here are a few miscellaneous laws.
Verse 15, if a slave has taken refuge with you, do not hand them over to their master. Let them live among you wherever they like, and in whatever town they choose, do not oppress them.
The slaves mentioned here are foreign slaves, and Israel was not beholden to any foreign nations to return their slaves because they didn't have any treaties with them. Additionally, because Israel was once oppressed as a nation, they were not to oppress others. They were to show compassion.
Verse 17, no Israelite man or woman is to become a shrine prostitute. You must not bring the earnings of a female prostitute or of a male prostitute into the house of the Lord your God to pay any vow, because the Lord your God detests them both.
Common sense, and we've had lots of examples of that so far. All right, just do it. Obey the 8th commandment, which is from Exodus 20:15, you shall not steal. No stealing or exploitation, which is theft of life. Chapter 23 continued, starting with stealing stuff.
Verse 19, do not charge a fellow Israelite interest, whether on money or food or anything else that they may earn interest. You may charge a foreigner interest, but not a fellow Israelite, so that the Lord your God may bless you in everything you put your hand to in the land you are entering to possess. If you take a vow to the Lord your God, do not be slow to pay it, for the Lord your God will certainly demand it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. But if you refrain from making a vow, you will not be guilty. Whatever your lips utter, you must be sure to do, because you made your vow freely to the Lord your God with your own mouth. If you enter your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat all the grapes you want, but do not put any in your basket. If you enter your neighbor's grain field, you may pick kernels with your hands, but you must not put a sickle to their standing grain.
Charging interest to a brother Israelite was considered stealing. And that's why in the New Testament, you hear all the time that it said the money lenders were sinners. Like they looked on the money lenders as like yucky people. Israelites were to live with the interests of others in mind, even at their own personal cost. Now, vows to God were voluntary, and we've talked about those in the past, but once a vow was made, it was binding. And if you made a vow to the Lord and did not keep it, you were actually stealing from God. Landowners were protected from stealing from their crops, but were expected to be hospitable to those in immediate need, like somebody traveling by or somebody who just got hungry. You could take a bite to eat. You just couldn't harvest it, take baskets full. All right, chapter 24, rules for remarriage.
If a man marries a woman who becomes displeasing to him because he finds something indecent about her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and sends her from his house, and if after she leaves his house, she becomes the wife of another man, and her second husband dislikes her and writes her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her, and sends her from his house, or if he dies, then her first husband, who divorced her, is not allowed to marry her again after she has been defiled. That would be detestable in the eyes of the Lord. Do not bring sin upon the land of the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. I feel like that is one of those like problems you get in 8th grade. Like the train is traveling at 80 miles an hour, and if it leaves at this time, but then it has to make a stop here, what time did
Moses is getting deep into case law here. It's getting quite complicated.
It's a little crazy.
And what he's saying is, This is not a general law permitting divorce. Rather, it takes divorce for granted and provides a framework for what should be done if there is a divorce. The cause for the divorce is something indecent about her, it says, which translates to the nakedness of a thing. I know that sounds weird, implying she has been unfaithful. But many believe it was something else improper, because if it had been adultery, she would have been stoned. It would have been a death sentence. So she, was probably being promiscuous or exposing herself. Who knows what she was doing? But then she marries again and is divorced. But because she has been with another man since her first husband, she is defiled to her first husband and cannot remarry him. Again, the two shall become one. Well, that one was split. She married another one, and then that was split. So she can't go back to the first one because that first marriage has been defiled because she married another guy. Does that make sense?
And it's passages like this that make me really grateful that we have Jesus.
Exactly. Now, Matthew 19 illuminates Jesus' thoughts on divorce when the Pharisees question him, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? They, of course, were testing Jesus, and this is how he answered.
In Matthew 19, verse 4, haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Why then, they asked, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? And Jesus replied, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard. But it is not this way from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman commits adultery.
Then in Matthew 5:31,
it has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality makes her a victim of adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery.
The biblical grounds for divorce, here we go, that spin again, like you said, it's going. The biblical grounds for divorce are still disputed today. Some believe adultery is the only excuse or reason. Some believe irreconcilable differences or that hardness of heart is a valid reason. And some believe these verses are not about grounds for divorce, but about a husband's inability to remarry except for adultery and not for a hardened heart. These verses can be interpreted in several ways. The only thing we can say for sure is that divorce was a hotly contested situation, important to Moses, the Pharisees, and Jesus, whether for adultery or hardened hearts. What we can prepare for prior to marriage and pray for and work at after marriage is faithfulness. To borrow a Hebrew word from Moses, you need to shamir your marriage, or figuratively put a hedge of thorns around it and protect it with your life. Okay, moving on from divorce. The other thing that God says you are not to steal is precious time with your bride and 1 year to produce a child.
Verse 5, back to Deuteronomy in chapter 23. If a man has recently married, he must not be sent to war or have any other duty laid on him. For 1 year, he is to be free to stay at home and bring happiness to the wife he has married. Well, that's a sweet
I know, that's a sweet one. They really, really... Again,
value
marriage and life and family, and you're not going to war. And you get a year to
be in love,
be with your wife, be in love, build that house or whatever you're going to do, plant that vineyard, and hopefully have a child to inherit it one day. The other thing you're not supposed to steal is someone's livelihood.
Verse 6, do not take a pair of millstones, not even the upper one, as a security for a debt, because that would be taking a person's livelihood as security.
And again, this is just one example. He's giving kind of case studies here. How about also stealing a person themselves or human trafficking?
Verse 7, if someone is caught kidnapping a fellow Israelite and treating or selling them as a slave, the kidnapper must die. You must purge the evil from among you.
This is not the first time God has addressed human trafficking or any of these other ways that a person can be taken advantage of. We've talked about a lot of these in other sections of the Torah. Compared to every other culture in the world, then, the principles that God set forth to provide for different classes of people and different situations were anchored in the character and promises of God for his people.
What's a club without friends? If you're enjoying the Bible Book Club, why don't you share it? And then you can say, Welcome to the club. New episodes drop every Monday, and get all episodes now on Amazon Music. As always, head over to susanme.com/Bible Book Club for show notes from today's episode. Bible Book Club is hosted by Susan Merrill and Heather Rubio. Edited by Buck Buchanan. Produced by Hayley Mawat.